back again, guys, to Jimo the Builder YouTube channel. This is the YouTube channel where exactly that we talk all about construction and matters to do with affordable house. Guys, here we talk mostly about affordable house. How exactly you can be able to build your house very affordably, guys. So I give you all the tips. I give you from the design, from the construction site, what exactly are some of the things that you need to be aware of, so that then you can be able to build affordably. But guys, there's something that I've noticed, that when we give quotation, you give a client a quotation, but then there are things people ignore, or then they think they are not as costly as they would expect. But then when you add up the total cost, you might find that the overall cost for that actually might be very expensive, right? Because when you think about construction, so many of you guys who want to build, you will think that the construction is all about sand, ballast, tumenunua kokoto, what else? The Darugo blocks, blocks, mawe, what else do you, cement, These are the things that people want to know. Another thing, probably the iron sheets, mabati, timber for roofing, and then labor, right? So we think that, once you have like these materials, it's like now, it's like that construction is over. But then you find that there are so many costs which are actually maybe ignored or actually hidden, or sometimes you may not be aware of, right? So I want to start from the foundation, and we see what are some of materials that I want you to actually keep note of, that whether you have them before that you can actually go ahead and actually start your construction, so that you don't have a lot of miscellaneous. Because if you're not aware of something, then it will actually be a miscellaneous. Where exactly? And then don't forget that the miscellaneous is actually should not be like that high. So you need to be aware of so many materials that the miscellaneous you are actually not aware of, or which may arise, should not be that high, right? So that then even when it comes to the proper planning, because construction is actually a capital intensive activity, right? So let's start from the foundation, right? So what are these materials, when you are doing foundation, that you might find that you'll be told and actually be surprised. So the first thing that we do once you go to the construction site will be you do the site clearance. That is easier, but sometimes the site clearance and the excavation might be very expensive, right? So the excavation, particularly if you're in an area where exactly you have black cotton soil, you might have to do a very heavy excavation. And don't forget, guys, that as the more excavation you're doing, it means you're going, if you don't have kind of an underground parking or anything, it means you'll have to do backfilling, right? So you need a lot of hardcore fillings to do the backfilling. So if you're doing very large quantities of excavation in terms of the cubic meter, it will mean then you will have to do a lot of backfilling, unless there is any kind of structure that is actually being built underground, whether it's parking or you are doing any kind of basement. It will mean that you're going to do backfilling. So sometimes you might find you have, yes, budgeted, you have the budget, but then you find that once you do the excavation, if the level of excavation is going deeper, it means the cost of construction is going to be very high. So you see, so it's very most important to be aware of, what will be the depth of foundation. Sometimes it's what we call if you work with an engineer, they will give you what we call the trial pit. So the trial pit will give you, relatively, what's the depth? Where is the hard strata? What we call the hard, where you have, a very stable ground, so that now you can be able to predict how much you're going to use. Otherwise, I've seen people who have started construction, and all the money you had, all of a sudden it goes to the foundation because probably you had not, the preparation was not well, or you are not aware of what to expect when it comes to building. So But of course, there are different kind of technologies which are there right now. Like you can do the suspended the floor, using the block and beam and all other technologies. But most of the time, it's very most important to know the type of soil on your site. But this actually can be, because you're not the only one building in that particular site, so you can be able to survey the neighboring plots, what exactly you can even ask, so that you can know what is the depth of that foundation, or you can work with your structural engineer so that then you can know what will be the depth of the foundations. So once you have done the excavation, so sometimes the excavation might eat up all your budget, right? So another thing that once you start building, you'll note is that you will need a hoop iron. Hoop iron. If you have not bought hoop iron, it might cost you a lot of money, because one roll might go for around 3,500. One roll. So hoop iron is a steel plate that we put on every two alternate costs. What exactly that means? If you have here, this is a mortar. If you have mortar here, and then another mortar here, so these are block. So hii ni mawe umejenga. Ukijenga mawe ingine hapa, so the next hoop iron. So hoop itakuwa hapa na hapa. So here you don't put it. That's what we call alternate cost. This hoop iron inakuanga important sana, because when you're actually building, it will prevent what we call the cracks, right? Because when you look at hoop iron, what it has is what we call, it is actually steel, and the steel inakuanga very high in tension. It can be able to take up all the tension that is actually, that we develop on your structure. So it's very most important. So you need to know how many number of hoop iron you need. Otherwise, the foodie might tell you on the day that you're building, and probably you had not budgeted for that. So hoop iron is very most important. So if you're talking about, for example, 3,500, and then you are asked to buy 4, that's 14,000. You see, so you need to be aware that you need hoop iron, right? So that is when you're doing a foundation. Now, another thing you will need, guys, is that once you have done the masonry wall for the foundation, the next important thing you'll need is actually the DPM. The DPM is a black paper that you see, the black sheet that you see we put on the foundation. So before you do the concrete work, you have to put the DPM. This actually prevents what we call the dampness. So your house will not have an issue with dampness. So the rising of water on the wall will not actually occur if you put the DPM. This is called the damp-proof membrane. So it is very most important. So this one will go for around 2,000 to around 2,500 shillings. Here in Kenya. So for example, if you ask, you need 4, that means, you are asked to give 10,000, you see. So you need to be aware that you have this, or to know the number, because most of the time I find the clients always complain that the fundi or the quotation did not include the DPM, and that might cause a lot of, problems when you didn't plan for that, right? So the next important thing that you might not be very prepared for is actually what we call the site plan and the site house. The site house also is going to take up a budget. So you need also a site house where you're going to store the materials and everything. Sometimes clients do not plan for that, or they do not put in consideration that they will need a site house. So the site house is where exactly probably even the people taking care of, as the construction goes, the watchman and everybody will be, and sometimes the laborers, the fundi na watu wa mkono, sometimes they might be staying there. So you also need the site house. So you need to plan some cost for that. But this is mostly a temporary structure you might build. So this is a temporary structure. So hii utatengeneza mostly by poles and some mabatis, the iron sheets. So it is not that expensive, but of course it's going to eat up on your budget, right? So you need to consider that. Another thing that, guys, things which is actually ignored when it comes to construction is actually also you need a toilet. So you have to put a budget for the toilet, because the people who are going to be builders, the builders, the watu wa mkono and everybody, they will have to use a toilet. So you have to have a budget that is going to take care of that. So that is also very most important. So the toilet is actually also important, and it's going to cost. So sometimes you might have just a temporary shed, because also when the county government, the health department comes on your site, they will require to see that, the people working, they have, somewhere they are helping themselves. So that is also very most important. So you have to have a budget for that. Another thing that client mostly ignore or they don't put in consideration is what we call what is the tools. So when you are starting construction, you need tools. So these tools, what we are talking about, is that you need things, for example, like wheelbarrow. You know, you need things like wheelbarrow. You also need things like spades, vijiko. You see, other things that you need are, for example, things like buckets. These are tools which are actually very most important when actually you are doing construction. Otherwise, if you start hiring some of these tools, if you hire, it's going to cost you more than actually buying that. For example, let's see, to hire one bucket I think is around 50 shillings. But one bucket to buy is around 200 to 250. So if you hire this for 5 days, it means it's better you could have bought your bucket. And in case ienda iharibike, then it means you're going to pay the owner of this. A wheelbarrow is hired at a cost of 200 per day. But a brand new wheelbarrow is actually 5,000. So you have to do the math depending on the duration of your constructions and some of these tools. A spade might be hired at 50 shillings. And then you have to do the math to know whether am I going to hire depending on the duration of the work. So if the work is going to be more than 1 month, I would prefer that you buy your own tools. For example, the wheelbarrow, the spades, and the bucket, and other tools that you might need. So it's very most important to have. For example, something like a spade, wheelbarrow is very most important, and also the spades. And also bucket, you need to have at least a minimum of 10, because this is what you're going to use, to measure some of the materials, and also, to carry water. It's going to have a lot of function. Another thing, guys, you need on the tool is also a drum of water. Or something to store your water, because you need a lot of water, so you need to have at least a drum. And this one can be around, the one with the 200 liters, so you can have at least times 2. So that will actually service your construction. And one of the things with buckets and this drum is that you need to bring something that is actually durable, so that, because when you're doing construction, there's going to be a lot of breakages. So you need to buy very strong, particularly for this one. You can buy the one, when paint has been used, those buckets, you can actually buy those. So that one will go for around 200 to 250. So you need at least 5 to 10 that will service your construction. But then this one will depend on the size of your construction, right? So that is very most important. Now, wheelbarrow will be used for any kind of transportation, and also when actually doing the measurements, when you're doing the ratios. For example, when you're doing a concrete work, you need to measure how many number of wheelbarrows, how many number of sand. So you need at least 2 wheelbarrows on site, right? So otherwise, if you have one, you're going to delay. There's going to be a delay in terms of the output, so you need to have that in mind. Another thing which is actually ignored when you're doing construction is water. So particularly if your site doesn't have water, it's going actually to cost you a lot of money. Water. So you need to consider, where are you getting the water from, right? So if you don't consider the cost of water, buying water for construction, remember that construction is you're going to use a lot of water, right? So you need to have a reliable source. Another thing is reliability of the source. You need to ensure that you have water 24/7, because you're going to do the curing of concrete, the curing of the walls and everything. So you need a lot of water. When you're mixing the ratio of concrete, cement, and you need water. You see, so water is actually much needed. So you need to consider, if you don't have water, where are you going to get it at a what cost, so that then you have a clear budget for that water. Particularly if you're going to buy water, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So you need to ensure that you have sufficient water. Otherwise, it's going to eat up on your budget, and sometimes it may cost a lot of money. Another thing, guys, that people don't actually consider is when you start doing formwork. So formwork, guys, Formwork is when you're doing any concrete work or anything that needs to be shaped with concrete, you have to put formwork. Mostly we use formwork, we are going to use mostly the steel plates. This one mostly we call them the trappers. And sometimes you might need timber, the 6x1. The 6x1. Sometimes you might need to use marine boards. So these are the three options that you need when actually you are doing the formwork. This one will cost you a lot of money. Remember that if you buy, for example, the 6x1 and they are used for formwork, it means that that timber is going to be waste. For example, when you are doing the ring beam, when you're doing the ring beam, whether you're doing a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom, you need to put the ring beam or the ring tail. So when you're doing this, you need to have the formwork in place. So this formwork is going to be, you're going to need a lot of timber. For example, let's assume you need 500 what? Let's assume you need Let's say even 1,000 feet. Remember that, let's say, for example, if you're doing this is your beam. So you see, you need that timber. Let's say the height of this beam is 450. Or let's use even just a simple beam of 300, of 250. Let's use 250. Or even 200 mm. If that is the beam, the height. So it means you're going to use 6x1, we are 6x1 billy. So this is like angle most we call them the sides. You see? So, and this one you have to protect on both sides, this side and the other side. So that means now you're going to use two. So if the whole house has a perimeter, let's say of what? Of let's say how many feet? Let's say 200. That's the perimeter, right? Or where you have the beams, 200 feet. So you need to multiply this by 4. You see? And actually, I've used a very relative number, just this one. So you see, you need 800 feet. So 800 feet, then you put, because you're going to cut, so you need to use to buy around 1,000 feet. Remember that probably 1 feet might cost around 25 shillings, for example, right? 6x1. So you need to have a budget of 25,000. Remember that most of this timber is going to waste. So you have to have a budget for timber formwork. Another thing, so timber is very most important. Another thing you need to put in mind when actually you are planning, this is very most important. If you're planning to build a house, you need these things. Another thing you need to consider is actually the poles, poles. So the poles, these are the ones that you're going to do the support. When you're doing whether you're doing the concrete work, and also they are the ones that the fundi they are going to use at the radar, right? So the one they are going to use when they want to build on a higher ground, right? So they're going to use the poles and also the 6x1. So the poles will actually act as the vertical and also horizontal. Then they put the 6x1 on there. So you need poles. So poles might cost around 200 on the higher side each, but one is around 20 feet, so it's quite bigger. So you might need, for example, let's say you need like, say how many? Maybe 30 pieces for a normal construction, maybe a 3-bedroom. So you see, you might spend on how much? 6,000. So these are all costs that are actually not really contributing to the actual house, but you need them. They are there, but they're going to go to waste. Once the construction is done, you're not going to use it. So poles. So you need to ensure that you have enough poles on your site. Another thing, guys, that is going to cost you money is actually things like transport. Transport. So you need to understand that you need to buy things in bulk. So buy things in bulk so that then you don't have this cost. If you're going to buy, for example, sand in tons, you're going to spend a lot of money in terms of transport because you are going to pay per trip. So ensure that you consider transport. If you need to buy certain materials, buy them once, you see, so that then you reduce on cost of transportation. Another thing, guys, you may not really consider is actually nails, mishumari. This one you will find fundi always asking for nails, particularly if you're doing formwork. And remember that once you're doing formwork, those nails are going to be a waste. The ordinary nails. They are not necessarily, but they are not they can actually be reusable, but not exactly probably on your side, because once we start doing the roofing, most of the time the fundis will require to use the new nails. So, but you can also recycle them, but you want to build something, particularly the roof, you want to build something which is has a strength. So nails is going to cost you money. So you need to be given a quotation, not exactly for roofing, but nails for doing other works. The fundi want kutengeneza gazi, so he's going to use nails. You want to use to do formwork, you need nails. So these are things that you're going to really need when you're doing all that. So I think those are the things that you need to consider. So maybe in a summary, things you need is to have things like hoop iron. Another thing probably I didn't say is the anti-termite treatment, the gradiator, the anti-termite. The anti-termite. So you need anti-termite before that you can start. Otherwise, if anti-termite is the one that's going to do what? To prevent the ants from eating your door frame. For example, anywhere you have wood, so it prevents so that's why it's anti-termite. It is an anti-termite treatment. So anti-termite treatment, you need it. So this one might cost around 2,500 per liter. So you see, you need to have that budget in your mind. That's what exactly that I mean. Another thing here, so we said about DPM, that is the black sheet. Another thing we said is the tools. Particularly, you need the wheelbarrow, you need spades, you need the bucket. Another thing we have said is water. You need to know where you getting the water and at what cost. Another thing is the site house. The site house. And another thing is what else have we said? Is a timber and also transport. So these are things that are going to be, they're kind of ignored, but they are going to have a lot of money. So don't put this as miscellaneous. There are things which are miscellaneous, but these are things which are very much needed. And also we talked about site house and also the toilet. Sometimes even we have issue to do with security. So sometimes when you're building, you'll need to have a watchman on site who can be able to give you security for your construction. So that's still a cost, but now it will depend where are you. So some of these things might not be relevant to all the sites. For example, you might have water on your site, so that is not an issue. You might not need a site house on, particularly if you have other structures which are existing. You might not need that. Probably you have already a toilet in place, and then probably you had timber, you had done construction previous. So, so all those things. And of course, we talked about nails. So these are costs that are very most important, but sometimes you might find the client had not considered that you might have considered only this. So those are the things that you need to consider. So see you in the next one, guys, and I hope that you have learned something. If you really like this video, ensure that you go ahead and actually like, comment, and ensure that you subscribe, because then I'm going to be telling you so much about affordable house and how exactly then you can be able to build a very affordable house for your family and also for yourself. So see you in the next one. I'm Jamal Bera.